Four of Pentacles. Security, insecurity, hoarding. A death grip on important possessions can cause you to hunker down or bind you to a fixed spot. Here, insecurity flourishes. Release any desire to hoard, protect your things in healthier ways. The King Oyster mushroom luxuriates in its secure and pristine spot. One fruiting body of this stout fungus has hoarded all the nutrients, a habit this card warns of, leaving little else for any developing mushrooms. While secure, it is for the most part alone. Are you trying to hoard something these days? Do you have a death grip on something? Do I have a death grip on something? Should we maybe try to change that behavior? The Four of Pentacles thinks so. I don't know. Maybe sit with that for a second. I'm gonna probably sit with that for a second after this episode. Anyway, welcome back to the Fungi Oracles. My name is Ash. I am your host, and you have officially made it to episode 6 of the Fungi Oracles, where we will be focusing on the King Oyster mushroom, also known as Pleurotus orangi. We have lots of new things to talk about today. The most exciting being this is a fungi species that we get a ton of nutritional benefits from, and we can work them into our meals really seamlessly. And I'm excited to talk about that, especially in the later part of our episode. But before we start all of that, we have some housekeeping to take care of, which is mainly to remind you to go follow us on TikTok and Instagram at the Fungi Oracles, all lowercase, if you haven't already. There you will find different posts to interact with, as well as our link tree that holds resources such as our transcripts, different sources for our episodes that you can look at and read up on if you'd like to. You will also find a link to a Google form where you can drop any pictures that you get of fungi throughout your weeks for our Fungi Fridays. I'm using those pictures to post them on our Instagram so that we can just revel in this fungi love that we all share. I also want to start this week by giving a couple of specific shout outs. One being an Instagram account that I found called the.tender.wild. I believe this person's name is Kaylee. Kaylee, if I'm mispronouncing your name, I apologize. Please call me out for it. Send me a message and tell me how to pronounce your name more correctly, because that's important. But Kaylee has a beautiful, beautiful Instagram, and more specifically, Kaylee had this really beautiful picture of turkey tail, and I actually reached out to this account and asked if I could use their pictures of turkey tail for the last episode that we had, which was over the turkey tail. And so the pictures that you're seeing on my Instagram of the turkey tail actually come from the.tender.wild. Give them a follow. They're doing really cool stuff over there. A lot of other Instagram accounts have also given me follows, and I'm always just amazed by your photography skills. Where are you getting those skills from? Please share. Also, where are you finding all these mushrooms? I want to give some context. I live in Texas in the United States. You know that Texas is in the United States. It's dry. It's hot. It's too hot, especially right now in the good Lord's month of August, to have mushrooms popping up everywhere. We have mushrooms popping up in usually October, March, maybe April, but right now we do not have that going on here. It is 100 degrees every single day. So I say that just to say, when I'm looking at these other Instagram accounts and you're just posting these beautiful pictures, I'm like, oh my goodness, where do I need to live? Tell me, where do I need to live? Speaking of living in places, I want to specifically shout out the entire country of Austria, because Austria, you are popping off with the Fungi Oracles right now. You are listening so much. Thank you. I hope that I get to meet you one day, you people in Austria that are giving us so much love. We also have love coming from all different parts of the world currently. It's blowing my mind that so many people from all parts of the world are giving the Fungi Oracles a try. Thank you for giving us a try, and I hope that you're finding joy in listening, and I hope that you continue to listen if you're finding joy in that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm excited that you're here. As mentioned, today we get to focus on the king oyster. We're going to be talking through all things king oyster. We're going to be talking about its anatomical structure, its niche, etc., etc., etc. I'll take you there in a second. But before we do, we're going to take one quick break before we get started. What I would like for you to do during this break is go pet your cat. Your cat deserves pets. And pour yourself a new cup of coffee, which I'm definitely going to do. And I'll talk to you in a couple of minutes. If you're like me, you're an avid reader, but you may not have time to seek out book recommendations. When I finish a book, I need another one in my lineup fast to keep my reading streak alive and brain satisfied. Luckily, I have the perfect place to go for those new recs, which is Lit Latte and Lawyer Liv on Instagram. On Lit Latte and Lawyer Liv's book Instagram, you will find recommendations for romance, historical fiction, contemporary fiction, fantasy, and so much more. Lit Latte and Lawyer Liv also focuses their attention on independent bookstores, which I can use to give myself some local shopping inspiration. Go follow Lit Latte and Lawyer Liv for your next cute little book find. All right, the king oyster, also known as Pleurotus orangi, also known as the trumpet mushroom, is a mushroom that humans widely eat. It's so exciting. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the turkey tail, which we also can eat, and we do find potential medicinal and nutritional value from. Go listen to the turkey tail episode if you haven't already to learn more. But the king oyster really is worked into a ton of the meals that we already eat. And I'm excited to talk to you about that. And I'm excited to talk to you about, what nutritional benefits come from it. However, before we get there, we have lots to discuss, just like this intrinsic value of the king oyster. We're going to talk about its niche, its anatomical structure, its life cycle, its adaptations, all the goodies. And the king oyster has a lot of goodies. So let's get this show on the road. To start, we are dealing with another sapotrophic mushroom. A sapotrophic mushroom is going to be a mushroom that is going to be decomposing other material to gather the nutrients and energy it needs in order to survive and to thrive. However, king oysters have other ways of getting nutrients as well. This is cool. A couple of different ways. So we have sapotrophic mushrooms. It's decomposing. However, they are also weak-willed parasites. The reason I call them weak-willed is because they aren't super aggressive by any means, but sometimes we do find them growing on roots of plants in the carrot family, while those plants are still actively alive and still trying to fight for their right. So they could get nutrients from those plant roots of specifically carrot species. So we have sapotrophic tendencies, we have parasitic tendencies, and we also have the ability to kill and digest nematodes. So we have predatory tendencies. Because king oysters do not get a lot of nitrogen from the decaying plant matter that they do decompose, the mycelium network of king oysters lures in nematodes by releasing chemicals that mimic the scent of food for these nematodes and draws the nematodes closer. Then the hyphae grow these really specialized microscopic balloon-like structures called toxocysts. And when these little nematodes come closer to the mycelium network because they're smelling all of these chemicals that smell like their food, When they brush up against that mycelium network where the toxicist is, the toxicist is going to release a potent volatile toxin. It's going to paralyze the nematode within a minute. And then the fungus is going to quickly send specialized hyphae into the nematode's mouth or body, releasing enzymes that liquefy and absorb the worm from inside out. Are you kidding? So we're not dealing with just a regular old sapotrophic mushroom here. We've talked about a lot of sapotrophs where they're going to be releasing chemicals to do this internal decomposition. The king oyster does that, but it also has these really specialized ways of being a parasite and also being a predator to other organisms around it, just so that they can continue to get as much nutrients as possible, so that they can continue to grow their mycelium network, sustain their mycelium network, and produce fruiting bodies as they wish. Okay, that was really the niche. Usually the niche is a little bit simpler because I'm like, hey, it's a sapotroph. Now we're moving on. But I had to tell you about all of that. It's just so very cool. The king oyster is learning to be a bit freaky, okay? Now let's get into the anatomical structure. If you were going into wherever you're going, a wooded area, a place with leaf litter, looking for a king oyster, what would you be looking for? Today, after a couple of weird weeks with our anemone stinkhorn and turkey tail, we're going to get back to this general stem, gills, cap structure that we didn't see with the anemone stinkhorn and turkey tail. If we start below the ground, as we do, the mycelium network of king oysters is pretty similar to other mycelium networks that we've discussed. We have the thread-like hyphae arms. It's localized to the area that has enough decaying material to support fruiting body production. Then, from the mycelium network, we have our stem. The stem of a king oyster is going to be white. It's going to be 10 to 20 centimeters in height and 3.5 to 5 centimeters in diameter. If you compare that to the other mushrooms that we've talked about, it's pretty dang large. It's a big mushroom. 10 to 20 centimeters in height is anywhere from about a third of a foot to 2/3 of a foot. It's pretty big. Like if you were to come across a full-grown king oyster wherever you're at, then you would be looking at a big mushroom. And the stem is very meaty, it's sturdy, and that's going to lend it to be a good source of nutrition for us later. The stem leads then up to the gills. The gills of a king oyster are going to be a whitish to creamy color, and they're going to be thin and crowded. Thin is referring to them being quite shallow or narrow from top to bottom, and crowded means that there are simply a lot of them. The gills of the king oyster are what we call decurrent. It means that they are going to attach to the stem, but they are going to run down the stem in a bit of a curvature way. Remember that the gills are helping with spore production, and the spores that are within these gills are also going to be that whitish to cream color. The gills are then covered by the cap. The cap is going to range from a light tan to brown color, and it's going to be about 2.5 to 7 centimeters in diameter. So we have some variety there on how big the cap is, but remember that stem is quite large. The cap is typically small and convex when young, and it flattens out as it matures into this nice and smooth cap protecting the gills. Boopability, 10 out of 10. To recap, when you're looking for a king oyster, you really want to be focused on looking for that huge stem that looks quite meaty. You want to maybe pull out a ruler, measure it, see how large the stem is, and if you have time, come back a day or two later and see if that cap has flattened out as it's matured, and then give it a boop, maybe forage it, and go to an expert and say, hey, is this a king oyster, before you cook it in your meals, okay? How do we get to this 10 to 20 centimeters in height, though? How do we get to the gills, the spores, all of it? Let's talk about the life cycle. King oysters, their mycelium grows at a rate of roughly 0.3 to 0.6 centimeters per day on standard substrates like leaf litter, like hardwood sawdust. This translates to about 3 to 4 weeks for full substrate colonization, making it noticeably slower to colonize than other oyster mushroom varieties. It's going to be taking its time a bit more. Once it has colonized an area and the mycelium has decomposed enough to have enough energy to form a fruiting body, a pin will pop up. We love our pins. Babyous mushrooms. The perfect conditions for these pins popping up and starting to develop into mature fruiting bodies would be temperatures of anywhere between 50 to 62 degrees Fahrenheit, which equates to about 10 to 16 degrees Celsius, which is notably cooler than other types of mushrooms we have talked about up to this point. Almost 20 degrees cooler. That's quite significant. It also needs some increased fresh air, high humidity. If all of these things are true, the pins will pop up and then the pins will have the perfect conditions to keep growing and growing. When the pins first pop up, they're typically much darker than a full-grown fruiting body, which could help with the identification if you were ever to come across king oysters as pins, and if you have time to come back a day or two later and see how they've developed. If they've started out like a darker brown color and then they lend itself to that white, tan, light brown color, you may be dealing with a king oyster. Then, typically within 5 to 7 days, they develop into the familiar mature king oyster mushroom that we know, love, and eat. Once they are fully grown, the spores are going to release and the fruiting body enters autolysis. This is a new word. What is autolysis? Autolysis is this natural self-digestion process. First, the stem and cap become like water soaked and spongy. Then, over the next few days, the fruiting body collapses completely. It turns into this yellow brown, jelly like, mushy mass of cells. And all of the cell walls are going to break down into this just like a goop. Then little invertebrates such as fungus gnats and nematode feed on the decaying issue. Bacteria break down the remaining proteins into nitrogen and minerals, returning them to the soil, helping the mycelium network gather some of that up if it needs to, and just making the soil around these mushrooms really, really nutrient-rich and lovely. Autolysis is very cool because it's just, again, the self-digestion process. It just kind of folds in on itself, turns into goop, so all of the other organisms around it can use that goop for good. Before we move on to the taxonomy and adaptations, you know that we first have to talk about reproduction and spore production and dispersal with our king oysters. The reproduction in king oysters is pretty typical. We've talked about this a couple of times now. It's going to mainly rely on sexual reproduction, and it does so through basidia cells creating basidia spores. So if we have two mycelium networks underground and they're compatible, those mycelium networks are going to meet, hug, love. They're going to mix up the cellular components within their cells. The two nuclei stay separate. Remember, that's important. But once the mycelium networks meet, hug, love, they're able to start pushing up those babiest of baby pins. And once that baby pin grows into a full, mature fruiting body king oyster, the basidia cells that are within the gills of the king oyster are going to help catalyze those cellular components, and more specifically, our nuclei now with all of the genetic components, to combine, mix, cross over the genetic components. So we have some new genes that we're dealing with. And then as we're dealing with those new genes, the cells will divide, divide, divide. So at the end of the process, we have 4 haploid cells with half the amount of genetic information that is needed. And those cells are the spores that will then be released from the gills, go and find all the yummy, beautiful, nutrient-rich soil that is around the king oyster so that they can form their own mycelium network and eventually meet up with another mycelium network that also has just half the material it needs so they can combine, form one whole mycelium network, and the process just starts over and over again. I know I went through that pretty quick. We've talked about this process a good few times now. If you are someone that is like, I need you to take that a bit slower, can you slow down, explain to me what's going on with those basidia cells, with the basidia spores? Reach out to me. Yes, of course I can go a bit slower. Next episode, I can take it a bit slower, or we can have a phone call. Look, I love teaching. This is what I'm here for. So, if you need me to take a step back, you just let me know. That is sexual reproduction, though. Then the king oyster can also go through asexual reproduction, but it's just through fragmentation. Remember, that's kind of like propagating your houseplants, where we can take a piece of the mycelium network, physically move it to a different area, and theoretically that mycelium network could continue to grow and colonize a new area with the same genes that it had 2 days ago in the place where you first got the mycelium network. Anyway, I feel like I should be quizzing you all over sexual reproduction in fungi by now. You're an expert, right? Surely you're an expert. If you ever go to a fungi trivia night, I'm pretty sure you'd be pretty successful. If you ever do, make sure to give me a shout out. Tell people to listen to the Fungi Oracles. All right, we still have a bit more to talk about. We're going to take another quick break before we do. During this break, maybe go reapply deodorant. It's August. We're sweating out here. Take your vitamins if you haven't done that already today, and we'll be back soon. Podcasts are a way for us all to break up the monotony of our day. Whether you listen on your commute, while taking a walk, or while making a meal, it's a way for us to learn, laugh, and find community. If you like the Fungi Oracles, you will most definitely enjoy This Podcast Will Kill You. They talk all things infectious disease, discussing the biology, physiology, evolution, and historical impact of all sorts of pathogens. This Podcast Will Kill You has been my go-to for years, and I always finish episodes feeling like I've learned something new and surprising. This is in no way a sponsorship, but just a friendly shout out to my favorite podcast of all time. This Podcast Will Kill You. Go listen. Welcome back. The second half of this episode is going to prove to be rather informative because humans have a lot of history with the king oyster, and we still use them widely today. But first, we need to go through their taxonomy, evolution a little bit, and talk about where in the world we can find king oysters growing natively. For taxonomy, we're going to talk about the different ways we can classify the king oyster. Remember, taxonomy, we have 7 different types of classifications, starting off with our kingdom, which is fungi, and then we'll go through the phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, and talk about how the king oyster is going to be categorized with each of those things. For the phylum, the king oyster is a part of the phylum called Basidia mycota. This makes sense because they use Basidia cells to create Basidia spores, which is what Basidia mycota fungi do. So we have those 2 nuclei that eventually combine their genetic information, cross over, they go through that process of sexual reproduction, like I explained just a couple of minutes ago. Basidia mycota fungi evolved from fungal ancestors approximately 650 to 900 million years ago. So Basidia mycota are a really ancient form of fungi. The class for our king oyster is Agaricomycetes. Agaricomycetes is going to be a class of fungi that have fruiting bodies that pop up out of the ground. All of the fungi that we've talked about so far have been within this class. Agaricomycetes evolved from flat, truffle-like mushrooms about 250 to 300 million years ago. Again, really ancient fungi here. Getting more specific to the characteristics of a king oyster, the order for our king oysters is Agaricales. In the order Agaricales, we have fleshy, umbrella-shaped fruiting bodies. Fungi within this order used to be just mushrooms with a typical cap and gill structure, with spores being able to be externally dispersed through gills. However, as more genetic testing is done on different types of species, we also now include species that form puffball fruiting bodies, more coral shapes, as well as bracket or shelf shapes, and these sometimes do not have gills. Of course, our king oyster does have gills, just giving you some context for Agaricales as an entire order. As genetic testing becomes more accessible, we're probably going to continue to see slight changes with this order. It's kind of the theme in mycology at the moment as we're testing more of these mushrooms. But regardless, king oysters are a part of it because they have the typical cap and gill structure. These Agaricales fungi evolved during the Jurassic period, back hanging out with some dinosaurs. Even more specific, we have our family for the king oyster, which is going to be Pleurotaceae. I'm going to try to say that one more time. Pleurotaceae. There we go. This is a family just full of all different types of oyster mushrooms. Oddly enough, a lot of species within this family actually have shelf-like fruiting bodies along decaying wood, which from what we've learned so far today is not what our king oyster does. They do love decaying wood, which helps them fit into this family, and other characteristics that help us classify them into Pleurotaceae is their thick stem and predatory behavior. We're going to see some of those characteristics overlapping with the different oyster species that fit into this oyster family. The oyster mushrooms within Pleurotaceae evolved during the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous period, about 100 million years ago. Now moving on to our genus, Pleurotus. They fit into this genus because of their oyster-shaped caps, decurrent gills, and fleshy structure. So all of the mushrooms within Pleurotus are going to have those characteristics. And last but not least, its specific species, Pleurotus orangi. What specifically makes king oyster their own species are characteristics like that super thick stem, super tall stem, their parasitic tendencies. The flesh of the king oyster is a bit denser than other mushrooms. It's lower in moisture content and significantly firmer than other oyster species. And comparatively to other oyster caps, theirs is quite small. So they'll have a smaller cap, but they're firmer, they're denser, which is a good thing for us when we want to eat them. These characteristics and more help them thrive in their environment, so let's go through some of these specific adaptations. Unlike most oyster mushrooms that produce large, delicate, fan-shaped caps that are thin, the king oyster has evolved this thick, dense, meaty stalk. This allows the mushroom to store more substantial nutrients, protecting it from drying out in the arid, windswept environments that they sometimes like. In the wild, king oysters frequently grow partially buried in the ground or at the base of their host plant, like those carrot species that we were talking about earlier in the episode. They have adapted to low oxygen, high carbon dioxide environments by elongating their stems upward as they search for fresh air. The fact that they have parasitic and predatory tendencies almost guarantee that they will have energy that they need to survive. And king oysters typically fruit in cooler, wetter seasons like autumn and winter, which allows them to not have to fight for space and allows their spores to not have to fight for space when they fly out through the wind and go and colonize a different area. Their mycelium can initiate pinning and development at significantly lower temperatures than other tropical or temperate species. And again, it just reduces competition for resources from other rapid growing fungi, makes it a little bit easier to survive for these king oysters. With them liking these cooler temperatures, where in the world do they grow? Well, with a king oyster being so nutritious, I want to start by saying that humans grow and harvest king oysters around the world. Before we get into the details of how and why we started to harvest and cultivate them everywhere, I want to just focus first on where we can find these mushrooms in their native environments in the wild. King oysters are native to temperate and humid regions of the Mediterranean basin, North Africa, the Middle East, parts of Asia, and even though those places can be quite warm at times, the significant part of the king oyster is that even when it's not in those warm months, it can still grow and form those fruiting bodies. In nature, they grow wild at the roots of those herbaceous plants in the carrot family, like we talked about. Particularly, they love the sea holly, and they're not considered invasive anywhere, which is really exciting. They're not going to move to different places and completely take over an ecosystem or an environment. They don't have the means to do that, hopefully, at least not right now. It could always change, but right now, they're not considered invasive in any natural environments. A good win. The first explicit scientific description of the king oyster was made by Dutch naturalist Nicholas Joseph Freiherr van Jacquin. Surely I am saying part of that wrong. I apologize to Nicholas. He originally classified it as Agaricus ostratus in 1775. Nicholas decided to classify the king oyster as agaricus because it was this catch-all term for gilled mushrooms back in the 18th century, and he decided to classify it as ostritus because ostritus directly translate to oyster shaped. So he was hinting towards this mushroom that was gilled and was oyster shaped. And it makes sense for 1775. But again, we have genetic testing now. And as we do this genetic testing, we're able to categorize and classify these fungi species into more specific taxonomic groups that fit them a little bit better. That means that later, the king oyster was transferred into its current familiar genus by French mycologist Lucien Culet. He was the one that officially named it Pleurotus orangi. Unfortunately, there isn't much information on first sightings in their natural habitats that I was able to find. Surely they are there somewhere. I just wasn't able to find them. But that's okay because we have plenty, and I mean plenty, to discuss for human interactions. Let's get into it. My favorite part of the episode. With our human interactions, first being, they are absolutely delicious. When did humans start to eat them, you may ask? Wild Pleurotus orangi grew naturally in association with the roots of these herbaceous plants in the carrot family, right? This made them readily available to ancient agrarian societies. There are some ancient texts dating back to the Han Dynasty in China that suggest that people were consuming them there. But because these mushrooms are so readily accessible in the areas that they grow in, I'm sure that humans and or human-like species have been consuming them for as long as we've been around. If we put our anthropology hats on for a second and think about early humans who were native to northern Africa, you cannot tell me that they were not eating king oysters. It's not documented, though. It's just happening in my theoretical brain, so don't come for me and maybe don't quote me on that. Nonetheless, the earliest documentation comes from ancient China. The first formalized culinary documentation is with the Sicilian king oyster mushroom that became highly prized in Italian cooking during the Middle Ages. It was so famously loved for its meaty texture that local legends claim religious officials in the Renaissance occasionally banned its consumption, believing the mushroom's richness would encourage sin. Isn't that hilarious? They were like, you love these mushrooms far too much. No way that you're loving them in a holy way. There must be some sin going on here. This was happening in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. And for centuries, king oyster mushrooms were strictly eaten when foraged in the wild. Mass cultivation and reliable indoor farming techniques weren't developed until the mid to late 20th century, largely pioneered by Japanese and Chinese mycologists. These advanced growing techniques transformed the rare localized fungus into a widespread global delicacy. Now we cultivate them all over the world with the techniques that were originated in Japan and China, and the king oysters that you get from the grocery store are most assuredly coming from a mushroom farm, not from wild foraging. I'm not going to go into detail of how you're going to cultivate a king oyster on this episode. If that's something that you're interested in learning about, please let me know and maybe we can add it to a list of bonus episodes that I'll be doing in the future. Just how do we cultivate? But instead of talking about that today, we're going to wrap up by talking about the nutritional value of king oysters and how they've really started to fit into our culture today. Okay, are you ready? I'm going to fire these off at you a little bit. The nutritional values. First, they contain beta-glucans, which ferment in your gut to help naturally reduce the body's production of cholesterol. Regular dietary intake has been shown in studies to assist in controlling fasting blood sugar and insulin levels. They're an excellent source of antioxidants, which help fight cellular damage and inflammation, maybe then just turning into a nice little cancer prevention method. They're packed with vitamin B3, vitamin B2, vitamin B5 that all help with energy and metabolism. They're rich in potassium, iron, magnesium, which all support muscle and heart function. And their combination of this low calorie density, satisfying meaty texture and fiber content makes them great for weight management and just a nice, yummy, fulfilling meal. And again, they're delicious. You literally can't go wrong here. They're super tasty in lots of different recipes, like let's say stir fry. But as your resident fungi loving plant based vegan, I'm plant based. Did you know that? I don't think you knew that yet. I'm plant based. King oysters also serve as a phenomenal meat substitute. They have this meaty texture that goes a long way when you're eating a diet full of plants, and king oysters fill that small little craving that I sometimes get for that meaty texture, and I'm sure other people who are plant-based feel similarly. The best example of this is using king oysters to make vegan scallops. They're yummy, delicious. I can also give you a recipe if you'd like. They also have a little bit of protein in them to help with this idea of a quote meat substitute. And food brings people together, and therefore king oysters bring people together. We owe them so much. To conclude, I just want to emphasize that king oysters serve us in so many different ways. Not only do they have these sick adaptations, like literally being a predator, but they are an absolute culinary staple, and that and so much more means that we should give them kudos, send them a little thanks. Send a thanks to the fungi gods for giving us something as useful as the king oysters that are serving so many purposes within our ecosystem just intrinsically, and they offer us a sweet treat and some nice nutrition. Okay, that is where I'm going to end the king oyster for today. But as I've mentioned, there's lots of room to kind of dive in a little bit deeper with our king oysters. So if any of that interests you, like different recipes or different ways to cultivate, let me know, reach out to me, and we can just add it to the list of fun little episodes that we're going to do. All right. We're going to now transition to go to our lovely Midnight Magic deck. If you've been here with us before, you know that this is when we go to Sarah Richards' tarot deck, Midnight Magic, and we pull a card to see where we're going in a couple of weeks. Let's go ahead and do that, shall we? Okay, that was fast. Here we have the Magician, which stands for or is represented by little birds of the woods. They look cute, they look quaint, they look small. And if I am remembering correctly, this is a psilocybe fungi, which means we're going to be dealing with our very first psychoactive mushroom. Ah, how exciting. So, here in a couple weeks, we will be talking about Little Birds of the Woods together. I'm sure that there will be plenty to talk about. I cannot wait to find out more about it, per usual. I say this every time because I get excited every time. But until then, for the next couple of weeks, please go to our social medias, give us a follow at the Fungi Oracles, all lowercase, and also, get caught up on our other episodes if you haven't listened yet. We have lots of good stuff going on. The more support that you give, the more likely I'll be able to do this quicker for you, and I'll be able to release bonus episodes, and I'll just be able to interact with you a little bit more. Please rate, review, leave a comment so that the Fungi Oracles can spread far and wide. I'm excited to be going on this journey with you still. I've just been having the best time researching these fungi, being able to talk about them, and hearing from you all about how you're enjoying it as well. Thank you for being here again today. Make sure to go and check out sources from today's episode and today's transcript if you'd like through our link tree. Those sources really are just really great to dive into. So please, please, please go look at them if that's something that fancies you. And until next time, have a great couple of weeks. I'll be excited to talk to you again. I hope that you get in some nice walks, maybe go suntan and drink a lemonade. All right, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye, y'all.